Yeah, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the organizing committee of this national workshop, I welcome you all to this second session on economy, employment, and migration. We had a wonderful session, morning inaugural session, come book release function, and uh, uh, what is actually evident is that when the COVID-19 pandemic hit India in the early 2020, the Indian economy was already in a downward spiral. And after that, India has suffered, we know, one of the largest contractions in GDP and increase in national employment rates. And also both the wealth and income inequality has been on the rise in India, as some of our inaugural session speakers highlighted. In fact, there are some estimates which suggest that in 2020, the top 1% of the population held 42.5% of the total wealth, while the bottom 50% had only 2.5% of the total wealth. And post-pandemic, the number of poor in India is projected to have more than doubled, and the number of people in the middle class to have fallen by a third. These are some of the estimates which we already know. And our book basically aims to explore how the pandemic has impacted the economy and the people. And quite clearly, such impacts have been of differential nature. For example, it depends on the type of employment and therefore people's capacity to cope up with the pandemic-induced shock. The poorer section of the population, they suffer relatively more because of this shock. And even those who are employed in the formal sector have faced loss of employment and income. In fact, in our book, we have a number of chapters which are dealing with these issues. So let me just briefly introduce those chapters. In one chapter, Dr. Shojit Das will be presenting in detail his findings. He discussed about the significant fall in the individual and family income and family expenditure. There were substantial losses of demand for even the durable goods and services from the urban upper middle class. In fact, Dr. Das points out two vicious cycles. First is that following the loss of income and employment, people have lost their purchasing power, which resulted in lower aggregate demand, which in turn further constrain the investment demand and employment opportunities. And second, in the public finance front, this chain of lower income, lower purchasing power, lower consumption demand, lower profit, all these have reduced the government revenue. And this, coupled with the conservative stance of the government to cut down the expenditure, actually have reduced the scope for the required fiscal stimulus for faster recovery. And we have seen that despite the scale of the pandemic, the additional budgetary allocation in various the social safety measures has been relatively low in India compared to other countries with the more or less similar level of per capita income. Also, there is one chapter on the MSMEs, and we know that MSMEs play a critical role in the employment generation in India. But it has been observed that the pandemic has severely disrupted the demand and cash economy, the supply of raw materials and labor, and these destroying the business operations of many of these units. There are lack of access of affordable credit. It actually only made the business environment far more hostile for these MSMEs. There is one data on by these CMI, CPHS, which reveals that comparatively higher proportion of small business owners, they close down their businesses and resort to daily wage or casual work. Even while restarting their businesses, these MSMEs in the post-lockdown phase, they were once again impaired by steep increase in raw material prices, lack of demand, unpaid dues, and related problems. And of course, the micro entrepreneurs, they have adopted a variety of coping strategies in the form of temporary layoff, flexible working hours, their diversification of their products and services, exploring some new alternative supply chains, and so on. But nevertheless, one serious problem that we have found out is that our knowledge is still limited on several aspects, like to what extent these units are impacted by the lockdown, what are the different constraints and challenges faced by the units, what are the nature of access to the problems of access to the formal institutions in terms of credit, technology, market, skill, training, all of which are extremely important for making any government intervention effective. And Also in India, there is, we know that more than 40 crore informal workers have been adversely affected by the pandemic. There are two specific chapters on these issues of the challenges faced by these informal workers. So there it has been observed that rural self-employed households were the marginal cultivators or petty artisans, or in the urban areas, those who are engaged in some small shops or petty economic activities, they lost their livelihoods, and they did not receive any legal protection. And also the migrants who are typically work in low paid jobs without formal contract, who tend to live in informal settlements, lacking access to the state provided social welfare. And this large number of migrant workers, they lost their livelihoods and found it extremely hard to survive. The chapter by Dr. Kingshuk Sarkar and Dr. Amrita Ghatak assessed the particular vulnerability of the informal domestic workers, and it reveals that in the wake of pandemic, sizable number of domestic workers, they lost their livelihoods, and few who could retain their work, they experienced unfavorable employment conditions. And for the domestic workers, there is, as we know, there is no paid weekly leave or sick leave, no institutional access to healthcare. So in fact, the suffering of these informal workers got aggravated as they did not had access to protective labor legislation and the social security provisions. And Dr. Sarkar discussed in detail the inadequacies of the existing labor legislations, and argued that the informal workers, they underwent relatively higher sufferings during this pandemic because of this absence of protective labor legislation. The employers, they do not have any legal responsibility to provide secure employment or earning to their employees. And in this case, and since they do not have any legal responsibilities, the stoppage of any economic activity during this lockdown directly resulted in loss of employment and a sharp decline in earnings. In fact, Dr. Sarkar also pointed out the huge excess supply of labor, which resulting in market wages below that of minimum wage, and the informal workers, they were left with too few measures to fall back upon this during this period of crisis. So going forward, it is important for the policymakers, the practitioners to build on the lessons that we learned in the past decades on the social welfare, the labor market legislations, and the provisioning and failures which are highlighted by this pandemic. Now, just to take forward these discussion, we are extremely fortunate to be joined by some extremely renowned panelists. I welcome you all in this once again in this panel. Before going into the formal discussion and deliberation on these issues, let me give a very brief introduction of all the panelists to this forum. We have with us Mr. Parthapratim Mitra, a former Indian Economic Service Officer and Principal Labour and Employment Advisor, Government of India. He also served as the Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Rural Development. We have with us Dr. Shoikat Sinha Roy, who is a Professor of Economics at Jadavpur University, and Dr. Sinha Roy's areas of academic interest include trade and development, open economy, macroeconomy, applied economics, and issues related to the emerging market economies. And prior to joining the Jadavpur University, he was a fellow at the RIS New Delhi, and he also worked briefly at the Asian Development Bank India office. And he was a British Academy of Social Science visiting fellow to the Department of Economics, Lancaster University in 2009. And he was also associated with Calcutta University, Bardun University, Kulin University as visiting faculty. And he has published in various national and international journals, monographs, and also in edited volumes. We are also having with us today Professor Jogesh C. Joshi, who is the Dean and the Faculty of Management Director and Professor at G.H. Patel Postgraduate Department of Business Management, Sardar Patel University, Gujarat. Professor Joshi has also published in numerous refereed journals, authored and co-authored 7 books, completed a dozen of funded and sponsored research projects, presented research in many international and national conferences, and he's also a member of various academic and research bodies. And we also have with us Dr. Surojit Das, who teaches at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and he was associated for a brief stint with Ambedkar University, and also worked with in the 12th Finance Commission of India, Planning Commission of India, State Planning Board of Kerala, and National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi. And his areas of interest are on macroeconomic policy, public finance, human development, and applied econometrics. So welcome you all to this session once again. So with this short introduction, let me now first invite Professor Shoikat Sinha Roy to share your views. It's over to you, Professor Sinha Roy.
How long can I speak, Shomodip?
15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to sum it up within 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm extremely honored to be here at this session on the economy, employment, and migration, and especially so when this important book on the impact of COVID-19 is being launched. I should take an anticipatory bill right in the beginning that I did not have time to read the entire book. The chapters on economy, employment, and migration, the third part of the book, I have read it in entirety. The rest, I have read it in patches. So my apologies for that, but I am sure that I would read it when my semester teaching gets over in a week's time. I'm also honored to be in the midst of a distinguished panel to be being moderated by Shomodip Chattopadhyay, who is a close associate and friend, and people in the panel. I have been knowing them. Some of them I have been knowing them from time immemorial. So I'm really honored to be with friends, colleagues, and peers. Now, this COVID-19, as Shomodip said, that it had a toll on the economy, employment, and especially with respect to the migrant laborers and informal workers. Now, this, before I get into the detail of this, I should say that the 5 chapters that are there in this section, the third section of the book, can be categorized into 2 or 3. The first one is the economy, impact on the economy by Surojit, and next is the one by Shomodip and Parthopratim Sahu, which is on the MSME sector, which are where they talk about the real sector of the economy and lack of demand. And Shomodip has gone into details, so I need not get into the detailing of the chapters. The second section deals with the workers, and the one by Kingshuk Sarkar, it's on the plight of informal workers, and which logically follows into another paper by Kingshuk Sarkar and Amrita Ghatak, which is on the domestic impact on domestic workers who are informal in nature. Now, and the last, if I am permitted to say, the last one section is perhaps to me, it's quite close to my heart. Economy, employment, informal workers, they're close to my profession, but the one which is really closer to my heart is the role of collective organizations, and who have played the role of unsung heroes during the pandemic. To me, they have played, because where the market has failed, where the government has failed, these collective organizations have come in, and that's what actually the paper by Indranil Dey, Mubashir Iqbal, and Ruba Hassan has tried to say, where they have really pitched in and how they have actually uplifted the life and the mind of people, especially the workers who are engaged, who lost livelihood, who often lost life, and who did not have access to food, shelter, many things, who have reached to these people. Now, if I am permitted to say, the pandemic actually created havoc to the economy. Let me start with the economy. And created havoc to the economy. Now, the economy and it was not all of a sudden. The economy was slowing down, especially after the third quarter of 2016-17. To me, the economy has been slowing down, and it has been a secular slowdown from 2016 third quarter of, if you look at the quarterly rates of growth, the economy had been slowing down from the third quarter of the 2016-17. And if you take a longer term perspective, stretching beyond 2016-17, you would see that post 2008-9, or post 2010, the Indian economy has not been able to come back on its rail. It is growing, and then again it's faltering. So there has been a fluctuating pattern of growth till it peaked in the second quarter of 2016, and then there had been a secular decline. So the growth curve, if you look at, it is an inverted V kind of growth curve. If you plot the quarterly growth rates, it has been an inverted V curve. And why I say the inverted V, because there has been talk by the government that there will be a V-shaped recovery post-pandemic. During the pandemic, it will be at the growth rates will be at the rock bottom, and there will be a continuous rise. But in some quarters there have been blips that growth rates have gone up post-pandemic. That is mostly on account of a very low base. It had gone negative 24.5% in one of the quarters, and obviously the similar quarter 1 year hence would be a large positive growth. And so to me, it is almost a statistical artifact, because from a low base, if you from 1, if you go to 2, it will be 100% growth. So to me, that growth rate doesn't matter, and that what is more important than whether that growth rate is sustained or not. And to me, the growth rate was not at all sustained. Growth is one side of the story. Which are the sectors? And Surojit has quite nicely shown that it is the manufacturing sector and the services sector which bear the brunt of negative or low or negative growth during the pandemic, post-lockdown. Now, and this has been the story the world over. And in India, especially the agricultural sector actually did not follow the pattern. The agricultural sector was the only sector which showed some positive growth. Thanks to the good monsoons in those years, the monsoons did not fail. If there had been a failure in monsoons, then the situation would have been worse. Now, with lack of growth across sectors, especially the manufacturing, the industrial sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector, what has happened? There has been lack of activity in the economy. Because of lack of activity, there has been lack of employment. And you would see that is the most important thing. You can have low growth in some quarters, high growth in certain quarters, but along with sustained decline in the economy in terms of economic growth, the unemployment rates in the economy has grown. And this is not only because of the pandemic. The pandemic might have accentuated it, but there has been a systematic increase in unemployment rate again from 2016-2017. And the labor force participation rates, especially the female labor force participation rates, have gone down very systematically very secularly from 2016-2017. And that has been a cause for concern, not only to researchers like all of us here, but also to the government. Why there has not been a pickup in employment? Why the labor force participation rate, especially the female labor force participation rate, has been declining? And this is not a story only pertaining to India. It has been in South Asia. It has been in most of the developing countries of the world. Recently, I was doing something on labor force unemployment and labor force participation rate with respect to South Asia. It's part of some work which RIS had assigned to me, and I was amazed to see the decline in labor force participation rates has been there in most of the South Asian countries. That means our neighbor. So it's not something which is standing out alone in India. It has been there, and it is a secular pattern not relating to the pandemic alone. So we have not been able to turn around the labor force participation rates, especially female labor force participation rates, to a higher level. Now, that's with respect to activity, employment. Now, who bore the brunt of this declining or increasing unemployment or decreasing labor force participation rate? Before I get into that, one thing I should tell this August House, there has been a very incisive article in the Economic and Political Weekly during the pandemic, I think in 2020, first bout of pandemic in mid 2020 by Dipankar Dasgupta and Meenakshi Rajiv, where they tried to show that it is not only lack of demand which mattered in the decline of output and employment in the economy, but apart from lack of demand, what has been riding on top of lack of demand has been the cut down in supply, because the lockdown had stopped the supply side entirely. Even with resumption of some kind of supply, we were not back to the pre-pandemic levels. And that is clearly shown in what Surajit has been saying in his paper or in his other writings, that the people he surveyed, they anticipated that in the 6 months hence after his survey, the people will not be able to get their income as per at the pre-pandemic level. So there was no surety. The perception turned out to be correct, and it was perceived that there was no major breakthrough that would be happening that can take the economy to a higher level. Now, who bore the brunt of such a slowdown, which the pandemic actually accentuated? I will not say that it was caused by the pandemic. It was triggered earlier, and it was not logically, it was given a fillip. The pandemic had given it a fillip. The loss in growth, loss in employment, increase in unemployment, and it is the informal workers who actually bore the brunt. On the real economy side, it's the MSMEs, and as Shomodip's paper correctly show, it's Shomodip and Parthapratim Shahu's paper correctly show that it is actually I would say it is actually the micro sector within the MSME which covers almost 90% of the total unorganized sector or total MSME sector. They bore the brunt, and as a result, people lost jobs. Informal workers who did not have any formal contract with regards to their employment, they lost their jobs. Now, there were many policies that were taken up in due course of time by the government, by the Reserve Bank of India, by the states, which Shomodip and Sahu's paper, they have formally put, but there was lack of response from the MSME sector. And the MSME sector after pandemic has not been able to come back to its rail. And despite all those policies, why the MSME sector has failed to grow or pick up, that's a major cause for concern, because I have shared it with Shomodip that I am personally working on something on the digitization or digitalization with respect of MSMEs, and I have seen that this sector, the urge to digitize or digitalize has been very low. And that has been due to several structural constraints this sector faces. And unless those structural constraints are being able to be removed, and that happens with the normal function, not only digitization or digitalization, with which they have to cope up post-pandemic, and especially during Industry 4.0, to tag themselves with the formal sector. Unless the structural only providing them with necessary finance will not help them to come out of these structural constraints. That's my clear hunch. Now, the informal workers, as two papers, one by King Shuk Sarkar himself and one by King Shuk Sarkar and Amrita Ghatak, they have been talking about that institution, especially labor laws, have been apathetic towards the informal workers. They did not do well to the informal workers. They did not take care. And when these informal workers, we have seen their plight when they were migrating from one state to the other to the third state, they were in a situation of distress. They did not have access to food, they did not have access to shelter, they did not have access to alternate work after they had gone back. So there was a complete failure of institutions to take care of the informal workers, and this is very important in an economy where there is an informal sector which is as large as more than 75–76%. Unless this sector is being given proper care in terms of some cash transfer mechanism, in terms of some employment generation scheme, the alternative, had the agriculture not been there, this, after reverse migration, these informal workers would have gone jobless, homeless, foodless. That's my perception. And now, and here comes the role of the collective organizations or non-governmental organizations who pitched in their rightful way to help out, especially the ones who are distressed. In urban sector, we have seen they have reached food to the urban households, to the people who fell sick, but in the rural sector, giving them access to food, polythene, and especially in West Bengal, at the same time, we were struck by a disaster, natural disaster, which is the Amphan. So providing them with shelter, medicine, food, basic food was the need of the hour. So one can have longer term policies for the revival of the economy on employment, but there had to be short-term policies which could have given, or some stabilization policies which could have given these workers some respite. But we saw that these policies, even though they were there, they were almost inadequate, and hence the plight of this poor, the informal workers, the unorganized workers, are quite pathetic. Now let me come just briefly to two important things which some of the papers have highlighted, especially with respect to the MSME sector. I'm glad that Shomodip's paper talked about the data requirement. The last survey which was done with respect to the MSME sector was in 2014-15, and thereafter there is no survey that is being done by the government, by the NSSO. Now, some state governments like Orissa might have taken a stride in having a census, but unless we have information on the marginalized sections of the economy, we will not be able to have proper policy actions to take care of them. So data is very important. Unemployment data, there has been PLFS, but there is inadequacy of the PLFS survey. It's not as comprehensive as it was before during the NSSO times. There are pitfalls in the PLFS survey, but still we have some data. The CMI has been collecting information on households. They have a large sample in the consumer pyramid and the employment pyramid, and where they show what kind of employment or unemployment has been taking place. So data requirement for any policy action that needs to be done hereafter, post-pandemic especially, there needs to be data on all sections of the society. Why this is? Because if you have to reach your vaccination to each household, then you need the information, what is the nature of your demand for vaccines. Because it has often been said by many that vaccination will give a stability to the economy and it will be on a path of its revival. That might be a necessary condition, that may not be a sufficient condition unless there are short-term measures, because even in December 2021, the unemployment rate is very high. It's almost 40% unemployment rate. So what needs to be done, that some flagship programs like the MNREGA, which took care of the rural sector, which built assets in the rural sector, there are gaps in the implementation of the program. Some urban program, if it can be implemented, I think Dre's has been talking about all these urban employment guarantee schemes. And I think the next section where Shomodip has a paper on cities, I think that's the need of the hour, where there should be urban flagship programs which can take care of employment and asset creation, infrastructure creation, even in the short run, and create resilience to the society that we are living in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shinada. Just these are very insightful observation on all the chapters or the panel's topic. You rightly mentioned about the problem of Indian economic experience of economic growth matching the inverted V curve, and also the problems which are faced by the manufacturing sector and the service sector, which are hit hard by this pandemic. And also we mentioned about the declining LFPR, especially among the women, which is a serious concern for all of us who are just try to look at the Indian economic scenario overall. And also, as you have mentioned, and also it is well evident from our inaugural session, that the COVID-19 has only accentuated this situation. It has only just exacerbated the already existing bad economic scenario which the India has been facing over the last couple of years. And also regarding the MSME sector, you have rightly mentioned about this patchy progress of digitalization, and this is very much important because as we have discussed in our paper, though very briefly, that the government of India has created many interactive IT-enabled digital platforms to provide easy financial and non-financial access to different services for the MSMEs. But with this kind of patchy digitalization progress that the MSMEs are in, so it's very difficult for the MSMEs to access all those government programs, which is creating a lot of problems. And also you have highlighted the importance of data availability, especially on the MSMEs and also on the large number of migrant workers, because if we do not know about their status, then how can government formulate the policy? And also you have rightly pointed out the important role which is played by the collective organization and the non-governmental organizations in addressing some of the hardships which are faced by especially the marginalized section of our country. So thank you once again for this insightful talk. And I think just let us know the views from all the panelists, and then we will take up the questions at the latter part of our of this panel. So with this, let me once again thank you, Shoykatda, and now let me request Sri Parthapati Mitra, sir, if you could share your views on today's topic. Yeah, it's over to you, sir. So please unmute yourself. You are muted. Sir, you are
we
muted.
can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Okay,
Yes,
can you
yes.
now hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
thank you, sir.
No, at the outset, let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to join this very august panel. I think perhaps I'm the only non-academic person here amongst a group of academicians who have done a very well researched perspective and given their analysis on the pandemic situation. But let me kind of give you the policy perspective, because having stayed in the policy world for almost more than 3 decades in government, let me just give you the perspective in which government kind of formulates its policies, you know, and the political space within which the various sectors function, particularly the labor sector, of which I have been associated with it for almost 8-9 years of my career. It's very much a function of the political space and the political scenario that emerges in the country. Okay. Now, to tell you, let me give you the brief analogy of how the labor legislations were passed. We had the 1948 Industrial Disputes Act, then 1952, the Employees Provident Fund Act. So if you see, the acts went on right up to 2008, when you had the unorganized workers, you know, the umbrella legislation. And if you care to see the political perspective, you will find a government which was slightly to the left of the center, which was caring about the welfare perspective of the workers. And we in the labor ministry eventually had to face a single wall barrier because the other ministries would constantly tell us that, look, you have to kind of ease and kind of stop your Inspector Raj, so-called Inspector Raj, stop your inspections. So we had a very tough battle within the ministry, within the government. You know, it is not as if it was a one-sided thing, but we did kind of went about our thing. And as and when the policy perspective, the political arena was shifting to the right of the center, you will find some kind of relaxations in the labor laws. Okay, so that is a thing which you must, I think, kind of take into consideration why the labor legislations have become toothless over the years. Because we have a fairly strong enforcement machinery, by the way. And if inspections are insisted, you will get enough phone calls to say, look, you have to go a little slow. But despite that, our labor officers have gone ahead and kind of, penalized people, very high people in their position. So that has happened once in a while. But now this codification, if you see, has been on the anvil in the 90s, in the almost since mid-90s. You know, we have any number of associations telling us that, look, we have a jungle of web of labor laws, so we need to compress them and put them into 4 codes. So what has in effect happened is that 4 codes have come about, but somehow it has got a compression of several legislations, but very important parts of those legislations have been left out. Particularly if you care to see, the threshold limits have been, for instance, for the Occupational Safety and Health OSH code, you find that the Factories Act threshold limit has been relaxed from 10 with par to 20 without par. It has now become 20 and 40, which means your threshold limits have gone up, which means there is a vast sector which is kind of unregulated or so-called free sector. In any case, even despite your Contract Labor Act of 1970 and the Industrial Disputes Act of 1948, we have had any number of, informal employment taking place, because informality, I mean, all of us know that the size of the labor force almost 93% of our workforce is informally organized. And even within the formal sector, 8%, even there you'll find a lot of informality happening, So what has happened is the legislations have kind of made so-called the ease of doing business, but I think the various states have to notify those laws. But recently, I think the Honorable Minister has given a statement that almost 90% of the states have come out with their draft rules for the labor codes. So once these rules are framed and finalized and notified, then the entire the codes would be in play. But couple of things I must say. For instance, the Occupational Safety and Health Code has made issue of what you call appointment letters mandatory. This was never the case earlier. You can say that the threshold limits have been raised, but the mandatory nature of the legislation is happening. But another thing which has happened is, although the Industrial Disputes Act has kind of kept the ceiling at 100, but then the permissions would become kind of easier now, because earlier the Labor Ministry never permitted closure of companies, because they had to really justify to show that the companies had to be closed, because the labor, being the weaker among the social partners, was always at the receiving end. So naturally the Labor Ministry can't, unless the company has really become unviable, one really had to take a very cautious judgment in giving these permissions. But be that as it may, the threshold for the contract labor provision has also been raised up to 50, which means that below 50, it is again, the sweet will of the employer, and the employer will continue. So these kind of things have happened. So why this has happened is that the policy perspective, the policy regime of the central government, or whatever the government of the day, has been changing more towards a right-wing kind of a shift that has taken place. Now, when the pandemic had come, as Shaukat has rightly said, that the situation had got accentuated, and already secular decline in the GDP, and then on top of it, you have the famous demonetization. It has really killed the rural economy, and the demand, the impulses which were there practically got sucked out of the economy. So in such a situation, when you have a right-wing government, you will find the emergence of supply-side policies. You will find ease of doing business, all that, but these have its limitations. You can raise the investment, but if there is no demand for it, then what you do? You neglect your domestic market and then start exporting. So fortunately, as Shaukat has rightly said, the agriculture sector, the food grain basket has come to our rescue. You have that 80% under the net, under the Act, the Food Securities Act. At least people are getting to feed. I mean, the government at least has kind of done this kind of a social welfare measure of feeding the people of the free rations and that kind of for per head for the family. So these have gone, but then the economy cannot sustain on these, unless there is a wholesome demand generation in the economy, unless jobs are created, the economy is not going to pick up just like that. There is enough that the pump priming of the government can do, unless the private sector comes in, unless there is, because after all, the dependence of the private sector is pretty much there, So if they are always kind of sitting over heaps of money, waiting to see where I can invest, and wait till, unless a PLI scheme comes, PLI scheme is nothing but you're bailing out the big companies. You see the inequality, why the inequality has gone up because the big companies, they really had the infrastructure. The small people, the medium people have got kind of moved, have kind of got sniffed out of the market because of the pandemic. After all, when the pandemic came and when the lockdowns had been announced, all of a sudden, it was these big guys who were really prepared for the game, for the whole show. Be it your digitization, be it all these takeaway, what you call home delivery companies and all. So what is one thing which has emerged is the emergence of the gig workforce, which the labor legislations do recognize, they have defined what is a gig worker, what is a platform worker, but mere definition is not enough, because there has to be a clear employee and employee relationship. That relationship is kind of, it is an elusive relationship. So the courts will have to intervene and say, look, you cannot treat them as your minor partners. They are very much your employees. Once they become the junior partners, or the gig workers become the employees of the larger platforms, then only this is going to be some resolution that is going to happen. But the courts do take into consideration that they have defined these are the new things that have emerged in the pandemic, the so-called the delivery economy, if I can use the very loose word. But then, what is happening is that the economy is being managed in such a way, and I'm sorry to say that even the media, if you see, the same media will say that, look, there is so much rise in the employment, and then the same media will tell you that, look, the picture is not so rosy. So somewhere the truth is in between, I think. So as Shoykot has rightly said, database. Now, database is an issue because I was particularly handling the Labor Bureau matters in the Labor Ministry. And Labor Bureau, by the way, I mean, I should not be tom-tomming for the Labor Bureau. Their estimates, we have always said, the NSSO estimates were always on the lower side. They were giving some 2.1 or something. But our numbers constantly said that they were above 2%. The NSSO surveys never went beyond 2% or 1.8% unemployment rate. But our figures constantly showed that they were above 5%. And now the truth is there for you to see. But when our numbers were giving those high numbers, those high kind of growth rates, unemployment rates, I was challenged. People were telling me, look, your methodology is wrong. So what will you do when it becomes inconvenient? You shoot the messenger. So I had a tough time defending why our methodology is correct. And it cannot be, as if that we have every quarterly we have to churn out numbers to show that the growth rates or the unemployment rates are improving. Certainly, the music was there for us to for all to hear. I think the employment situation was becoming grimmer, because unless there are investments, unless the investments absorb the labor force. In fact, the capital intensive ratio has gone up. KI ratio has gone up so much. The capital investment ratio that you probably need a change in the entire perspective of how you're planning. Just setting up some huge companies with so much of foreign investment, FDI, will not solve the problem. I think that needs to be understood. We have to kind of keep our eyes and ears close to the ground. We have to see what exactly is the nature of the workforce. In fact, if you see the nature of the workforce, it's like some kind of a pyramid. We have almost 70 to 60 to 70% people who are practically without any skills. They do not have food to eat. What will they kind of do for their education and health? Forget about that. So naturally, what happens? Unskilled wage employment is their only option. And when there is unskilled wage employment, you may notify the minimum wages, you may notify the floor level minimum wages. Who is going to observe all this? Because they have to fill up their stomachs, So naturally, you have the legislations. We probably are quite a legislated economy. I think our society is fairly well legislated. We have legislations everywhere. But then what is the kind of enforcement on the ground? Practically nothing. Entire agriculture sector, it is again depending on your demand and situation. The wages may be going up during the harvest season. Again, around the year, it was the Narega. You see, when the Narega came 2005. So if you see the political economy, you can see what kind of a government we had. The Narega legislation is now coming in handy to at least provide succor to the migrant workman. In fact, the interstate migrant workman has all the wherewithals of giving the migrant worker the benefits. But unfortunately, there is no record of who is the employer and who is the employee. Merrily, everybody slipped over it. And then suddenly, when this migrant crisis came out, the migrants had no option but to leave their places of work and rush to their villages. What a sad plight. So you have all the legislations, but the problem is that nobody enforces, or there is no will to enforce in this country. I think this is what I should say. The problems are quite well known. It's not as if government is not aware of the problems. It is probably knows the problems better than most of us, at least better than me at least. So, but the will, there has to be a will to kind of enforce this. Hopefully the e-Shram portal, it has got about 28 crore unorganized workers. So I read the other day that probably they will be extended the benefits of the social security. This was planned way back in 2008. That unorganized workers, in fact, frankly, many of the state governments, state of Kerala, for instance, they have gone ahead and have a wonderful social legislation. I think friends who have worked in Kerala will bear me out on this. They have a wonderful social legislation system taking care of the workers. I think the Kerala model probably has to be replicated throughout the country. There are other states which have kind of extended that Unorganized Social Welfare Workers Act, the 2008 Act. But unfortunately, in the center, we did precious little. So I think I will stop here. With my kind of not a very systematic kind of presentation, but there it is. I leave this now to Shomudip to continue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's nice to hear you, and some of the thoughts are really provocative. Like you really take us to the nitty-gritties of labor legislations and why they are, in a sense, toothless in India. And you rightly pointed about the need for grounded knowledge on the nature of workforce and to devise the legislation accordingly, and also the political will which is needed for proper enforcement of the legislation. So definitely we will have some more questions on your thoughts. So if and when comes, we will take it later on, sir. So thank you once again. So with this, now let me request Professor Joshi, if you, sir, please share your views on the chapters.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'll first of all, I thank everyone on the panel for being and for enlightening me in particular, and I also congratulate all the authors from IRMA, our friends, Professor Day, Professor Hippu, Professor Chattopadhyay, for working during COVID. When Professor Indranil shared the soft copy of the book, that time I was enlightened, and it was inspiring that at least we have people who are just glued to the television, watching the difficulties people are facing, and migrant laborers going from urban areas to back to their home, etc., etc. And I thought, oh, these are the friends who are working during these difficult times, keeping their focus on. So I congratulate all of you for being so thoughtful and so productive during these periods as well. So I'll frankly, again, I'll accept that I have not gone through many of the chapters of the book, but I would like to share our own experience of working in the rural areas. We have been macroeconomic, which will, I think, give some clues to what is happening in the or what has been shared by the two previous speakers regarding the demand by Professor Sinha Roy and what is happening to rural areas, why demand is not coming. We all know he was talking about inverted V-shaped economic recovery or depression during the COVID times. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, please carry on.
Yeah. So it is like the last 10 years or so, I've been fortunate to get some good research projects from the government of Gujarat, UNDP, then Ministry of Rural Development, and also from the Election Commission of CEO of Gujarat, as well as Election Commission from. So we have traveled a lot in rural areas of Gujarat and Rajasthan, and that is what brings us to. I think I may not be correct, but my observation of what is plaguing, why we are not able to achieve higher growth rates. Because if we look at the rural areas, they, to my mind, they constitute the main body of the economy. Okay, like human beings, from the neck to the up to the leg. This is the main body of our, which we have more weight. So same way, rural economy can be drawn parallel with the human body, where the much of the organs and the although decision is undertaken at Delhi or in the urban areas or by the intellectuals and the policymakers and the literates, but the body is the one which constitute the larger mass. So I'll focus on two of the particular initiatives of the government, the new government since 2016. And one is where we visited 71 gram panchayats in Gujarat and Rajasthan, and another program initiative. So this was pre-COVID times. And then we visited the around 60 gram panchayats in both the states after the first wave of COVID. Okay, it was, I'm remembering, November, December 2000. We took a chance, and we were fortunate that nobody of the team, which constituted the faculty members and the field investigators, around 20 of us, nobody suffered and from the COVID. So that was the best part of it. One, because we were in Anand, which is a small place, and we were visiting the rural areas which were not affected by the first wave of COVID. And it was the fact was that if we remember, then it was the agriculture sector and the primary sector which I think among all the other the secondary and tertiary sector, it was faring well during COVID first wave at least. Second wave affected the villages as well. As we all know, it affected the urban areas as well, as there were many casualties, and things went from bad to worse during the second wave. Now, the first scheme was the Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, and the second is the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Rural Mission. Now, both the theme of the workshop is labor and income and human development, or if we talk of the panel, then it is economy, employment, and migration. Now, after first wave, what we saw was reverse migration. People from urban areas, they went to rural areas. So when we visited during October, December, we realized that, or it was found that the Manrega workforce, the employment which was provided in villages because of Manrega, has increased considerably. This is what was informed to us by the Gram Panchayats and by the district officials. Now, the difference between these two initiatives is that the Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, as we all know, is one of the initiative which is focusing on convergence of funds from existing projects and existing funding which the rural areas receive. While Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Rural Mission is where critical gap funding is allowed and is available. Okay, so therefore the objectives both these definitely include the aspects of rural economy, employment being created in the rural areas, and that will result into the ideas that reverse migration can take place. So, or migration from rural areas can be reduced to urban areas. So that will also be a good achievement for these initiatives. So they focus on the holistic development of the rural areas, Gram Panchayats. They talk of standard of living and quality of life, as all the naturally policy will aim at these kind of objectives. They are talking of improved basic amenities, higher agricultural productivity, enhanced human development, better livelihood opportunities, reduced disparities, access to rights and entitlements, wider social mobilization, enriched social capital. These are the policies which the objective of these policies. Okay, generate model of local level development and effective local governance, giving excellent role to Gram Panchayats and these other stakeholders, nurture and identify some of the better Gram Panchayats so that the success achieved can be replicated in other Gram Panchayats. And then the Rural Mission was focusing on the clusters which are near to the urban areas and where some central economic activities already taking place. The idea was to build around that the cluster activities or the economic activity, which is the mainstream activity in the cluster, and build around that so that the migration which takes place can be reversed. So therefore, what they decided was it was in the form of integrated cluster action plan, and which and this was revolving around 21 economic indicators or components, which are called development components. Now, these components include, one is the piped water supply, because these are the basic necessities. Okay, social amenities, economic aspects, and the third was the social infrastructure and the economic aspects. These were the three main aspects which were covered by these 21 components. Now, these included piped water supply, inter-village road connectivity, health, sanitation, skill development training, agri services and processing, education, tourism promotion wherever possible, environment, employment and SHG formation, rural housing, social infrastructure, sports infrastructure, social welfare, village street lights, public transport, LPG connection, solid and liquid waste management, drain facility, digital literacy, and citizen service center. Now, these are obviously they cover all the aspects as far as the planning is concerned and as far as the implementation of these various projects. So it is, the idea was that Gram Panchayat will decide. Of course, it has to follow the procedure of getting it. The nodal officer is there at the district level and the state government, and then in the Ministry of Rural Development of Government of India. So all those procedural parts have to be followed, but the projects are to be decided based on the priority of the cluster. So, for example, if we take the case of Gujarat, then the 4 clusters, 2 of them was Ambaji and Shamlaji, which are basically religious, having a very high religious faith as of the people, and which constitutes the main economic activity. Now, whether it is possible to incorporate some other economic activities around this main economic activity so that amenities can be improved and the people will get employment in these urban areas themselves, so that the migration can be stopped and the standard of living or betterment of, you can say, well-being of the population around this area can be improved, and they can become the center of economic development and economic activity. So therefore now the COVID-19 pandemic offered a very good opportunity in a way, because many of the people from urban areas and metropolitan cities, they had returned to these clusters, and that time, if you have the better conditions of getting employment in the, because that time was suffering for everyone, and when they are coming back to their rural areas, and if that time they are able to get some better opportunities of engagement and livelihood, then they would stay back. But for a country like ours, which is still underdeveloped economy, we know we have so many supply constraints because of the fact that the per capita income and the resources, etc., all these are scarce. So therefore, if these programs or what I believe is that when we say India is, we were talking of double-digit growth rate. Right now we are talking of, or we are aiming at, doubling farmers' income. Now, how this will happen? Urban areas, middle class, so-called middle class people, they have purchased what is called as the flat screen televisions, or they have, many of them are even the elderly people, 40 year plus, they are buying bullet motorcycle, etc., etc. So their replacement demand is already getting satisfied. It is the rural areas where, as I was telling you, which form the body of our economy. Majority of people still live in rural areas. Their incomes and opportunities and the livelihood is not getting diversified. And that is the reason the replacement demand from the rural areas is not coming up, which is therefore failing to give a boost to further boost to the GDP growth rate, etc., in our economy. 7%, 8% is quite good. So that is what the urban areas and industrial economy, services sector can do. But rural sector becomes very, very important. And therefore, what we found was that these two very well formulated policies, or we can say initiatives, it is not, they may not be termed as policies, but these two very well formulated initiatives, they, like we observed in Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, that some Gram Panchayats, some of the member of parliaments, they were able to do wonderfully well in their Gram Panchayats, out of 71 Gram Panchayats which we studied. So at least we can say that there will be around 20 out of 71, 20 Gram Panchayats were excellent, where the member of parliament took interest and of his own, without any specific funding allocated for this, they were able to do wonderfully well. But what about the other 50? Okay, so therefore so here also in case of Shama Prasad Mukherjee Rural Mission, there are many wonderfully executed projects which have been completed. When we visited, it was halfway completed. Other projects were still being implemented. So there is need, therefore, that whatever are the success stories in rural areas, if they can be replicated, why in today's age of digital literacy and digital penetration, it is still lacking in rural areas. But as Shri Mitra was telling, the more than government, nobody knows. It is a fact, right from the Gram Panchayat level officer, they know everything, what is happening in the economy and what are the difficulties also they are aware of. But for maybe it is because of the resources or because of the willingness to implement, and because of various pressures and pulls of various other stakeholders, or we call public opinion, etc., the government and the officials, they are not able to perform to their best of ability, and what India is capable of. So what we found out was that official at the district level and Gram Panchayat, they become very, very important. Then community participation, if we have to achieve good in rural areas, which will help us achieve good at the national level also. Community participation, development of commons, and making best use of these commons for economic activity, for betterment of the well-being of the population. Then sincere participation of NGOs, SHG kind of institutions, Anganwadis, ITIs, industrial training institutes, they are all existing. It is not that we are required to reframe them, but we are not rejuvenating them in the rural areas. Okay, so NGOs, SHGs, similarly, skill development of the rural areas, which is, we are talking of agribusiness and agri-export, etc. This year, the agri-export in the wake of maybe Ukraine's problem, etc., we have been able to do well. Similarly, CSR activities, law has been framed, but it has to show its results in the rural areas specifically. Sports infrastructure, digital literacy, all these become very, very important when we talk of, and this has to be undertaken in each of the Gram Panchayats. SHG is only for women. Why? Youth in villages, they are also loitering around a great deal, one can always see. so this is my submission, and this is my study that, or this is our study and observation that the best practices have to be replicated. Focus has to be given on reviving the SHG kind of local institutions in villages, and that is what will make India a bigger economy. It is only the main population which lives over there. So that will solve many of the issues which we keep discussing, which we keep reading in the newspapers, etc. And what is clearly reflected in the macroeconomic studies which have been cited by Professor Roy and Professor and Shri Mitra also. So this is my submission, Professor Chattopadhyay.
Thank
And
you.
thank you very much
Thank you, Professor
for giving
Joshi.
me an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of the government schemes, and especially making those government schemes uh, uh, responsive to the needs and priorities of the local people, because that is the only way through which we can make the economy resilient and maybe better prepared our economy for to face any future pandemic like situations. Thank you once again for sharing all your thoughts. Now it's may I now request Shurojit, if you please, yeah, and also I would request you to please finish your presentation within 15 minutes, because you know you have a next session from 4.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is the PowerPoint visible?
Yes, yes. You just make it full screen.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, at the outset, I must thank IRMA and the other organizers for giving me this opportunity. And I am also feeling honored to be part of this very experienced and eminent panel. I'm particularly thankful to Shoikatda for reading my paper and giving some useful comments. We will discuss in detail in future. So what I'm going to do today within 15 minutes is, I'm not exactly going to present the chapter which I have written for the book, but that I wrote 1 year back. After that, I have done 2 more work. So I would incorporate those things also in this presentation, which are of course related issues and relevant for today's discussion. So it's on some aspects of economic impact of lockdown in India and the way forward. Now, this I have mentioned in the book chapter, that we conducted a telephonic survey in 13 states, and we could go for direct primary survey in 2 states, Goa and Assam, during 2020-21, to understand the economic impact of lockdown on common people in India. So, is there a way to hide this? Okay. Yeah. So the summary of the findings I am telling here, the sample size was 3,142 households comprising of 14,472 people. Respondents were from diverse occupational background, mostly involved in unorganized and informal sectors. 47% families reported absolutely zero income during the lockdown. As far as our survey is concerned, the average income of 3,142 families came down by 54% during the lockdown. 50% respondents reported increase in their indebtedness due to the lockdown, because the expenditure, family expenditure, could not come down proportionately. I mean, in fact, some families have reported increase in expenditure also during lockdown. Rest of the families could manage somehow with their past savings. It is not changing. Okay. So as high as 46% of the respondents in our sample suspected that their expected income would be 40% of their pre-lockdown income on an average, which Shoikatda was mentioning. 3,124 respondents answered the question whether an urban employment guarantee scheme is required in India or not, which Shoikatda was advocating for. More than 2/3, 68% respondents have said that there is a need for such a program in the current situation. I mean, in this context, I must mention that our sample had a urban bias. Most of the respondents were from urban areas rather than rural areas. 72%, I mean, we were asking people whether they have received, as per the promise of the PM Garib Kalyan package, whether they have received free ration or free gas cylinder or some money in the Jan Dhan account or not. So 72% respondents have said that they have got some ration free of cost during the lockdown months. 27% didn't get. 74, of course, it varied widely state to state. 74% of the respondents said that they didn't get any money in the Jan Dhan account, or they haven't even heard of something called Jan Dhan account in some states. Only 25% have received some money in Jan Dhan account, and less than 23% families got gas cylinders, free gas cylinders during the lockdown, and 77% have not. This is the all India situation. It also varied widely state to state. As far as the unemployment rate is concerned, in the book chapter 1 year ago, I calculated unemployment rate in a different manner. But now we have got this unit level data on PLFS is available. I have nothing against CMIE data, but I rely more on PLFS data. It has got its own limitation, but still based on PLFS unit level data, we have made some calculation. What we have done is we have, for comparison's sake, first of all, we have changed the definition of unemployment a bit. Let me explain that. That is people with zero income. I mean, people who are employed but earning zero income, that category of unemployment has increased enormously during the lockdown months. So during the April to June 2020, we have considered people with zero income to be unemployed. And also there was a significant drop in the labor force participation rate, particularly among females. That was not really voluntary. However, it is considered to be voluntary unemployment according to the official estimate, but we have considered that to be involuntary unemployment. So that way, if we look at proportion of labor force with zero income during first 3 months of lockdown, we see that 33% of people in urban areas were with zero income. Either they were unemployed or they were employed with zero income. And overall, including rural and urban areas, the percentage was 22.5%. So increase, if we compare the first 3 quarters before lockdown, the first 3 quarters of the financial year 2019-20, with the first 3 months of lockdown, that is first quarter of lockdown, then we see that in urban areas, the unemployment rate actually went up by 204%. That is, it tripled. And overall increase was 157% in the first 3 months of lockdown in India. We have, this is the comparison that earlier in rural area, unemployment rate was around 8%, which went up to 18.5%. In rural areas, urban areas, it was around 11%, which went up to 33%. And overall, it was 8.7% before lockdown. After lockdown, it went up to 22.5% in the first quarter of lockdown, first phase of lockdown. So we have seen not only this unemployment rate, but also to understand people's income loss, we have seen proportion of labor force with less than 100 rupees a day income and less than 200 rupees a day income, which is equivalent to the MGNREGS wage rate. So we see that in urban areas, as many as 43.6% of the labor force could earn less than 200 rupees on an average a day. That was the situation, and the other details I'm not going into because there are other slides to show. We have done it caste wise for different caste categories. We see that for all caste categories, unemployment rate has gone up enormously, quite secularly, but it has gone up for, interestingly, for others, that is general caste, unreserved caste, it has gone up to 24.6%, which is the highest. And surprisingly for ST, it went up, but it went up relatively less to 18.6%. Then in the same manner, we have seen the proportion of labor force earning less than 200 rupees a day. There we see that caste category wise, obviously ST households, SC households, 48% of SC households, that is almost 50% of SC households, could earn during lockdown months, could earn less than rupees 200 a day. And 46% of ST households could earn less than 200 rupees a day, followed by OBC and others, 42.8, almost 43% and 42% of the labor force which could earn less than rupees 200 a day. If we look at religion wise, for all the religions, it has gone up enormously. For Christianity, it has gone up from 11.5% to 23.7%. For Hindus, it has gone up from 8.6% to 22.1%. For Muslims, it has gone up from 9.6% to 22.8%, and so on. So that was really, we have also calculated state-wise, but I am not showing that for paucity of time. I have to show some other things, that's why. But we have calculated these things state-wise also. And as far as the income drops are concerned, almost 46.7% of the non-Hindu, non-Muslim, non-Christian religions, that is Sikhs, Jains, all including, 46.7% of them could earn less than rupees 200 a day. Now, then we have carried out one Google form-based survey to understand the postponement of consumption decision by the urban upper middle class, which Shomojit was mentioning, upper middle class household, vis-a-vis these items: automobiles, furniture, electronic items, property, flat, etc., house, travel within India, surgery, and organizing family get-togethers. So here we have seen that almost 1/3 of the total expenditure, planned expenditure, got postponed by more than 1 year or so. And we asked them whether it has been postponed by 3 months or 6 months or 1 year or more than 1 year, etc. So these are the percentages. Now, from here, we can see that the demand for these industries would also come down due to lockdown by these percentages. So there was huge fall in demand, and also we have seen that it is quite proportionate to the purchasing power of people. So because of income loss, people lost their purchasing power, and there was income uncertainty, vulnerability. Because of that, they postponed their plans of purchasing consumer durables, the urban upper middle class, and also for the rural people, because of huge income loss, there was drop in purchasing power. As a result of that, there was drop in aggregate demand, and as a result of that, growth rate was negative, unemployment increased, and so on and so forth. So after that, Atmanirbhar Bharat package came, and as mentioned by many in the previous session also, that out of 10% of GDP amount of package, hardly 1% was actual expenditure, but most of it was in terms of liquidity infusion and so on. But in spite of all these efforts by the government, if we look at the credit deposit ratio of all commercial banks in India taken together, as proportion of the credit deposit ratio is not picking up. In fact, it started declining from 27th March onwards, and it declined up to 25th September. It remained low up to 26th March of 2021, and then onwards it is still declining. So it is not picking up, and obviously the commercial banks' investment in government securities and other approved securities as proportion of credit is going up, which is the reciprocal of which is the complementary set. So this is happening because of the fall in expected rate of profit, So it is not a good time to invest. So in spite of government efforts, what people are doing is people are probably taking easy loans, but they are replacing their past debts with these easy loans. But at aggregate level, investment is not picking up in the economy yet. I was arguing that obviously the fiscal situation I would talk about in a moment, but I was arguing in the first session that our foreign exchange reserve is going up and up. Now it has crossed $600 billion, which is around 23% of GDP, 46 lakh crore rupees, something like that. And throughout this whole period, 20th March 2020 to 2nd July 2021, we have seen that there has been continuous rise in the BSE Sensex, the black line, which has gone up consistently when the economy was facing a negative growth rate and huge crisis of unemployment and starvation and so on. So I was arguing that this huge stock of foreign exchange reserve, which fetches less than 1% of return per annum, can be utilized to finance government expenditures, particularly in social sectors, education, health, employment generation, poverty eradication, where the multiplier effect will be maximum for faster recovery and for solving humanitarian problem. Now here, this work also I have done recently, that if we look at the trend in public finance, I don't want to describe these graphs, but we can see that here I have plotted the interest payment component of the combined government and combined health expenditure and education expenditure and capital expenditure of government. The dotted line is interest payment component as proportion of GDP in India. If we add up the total combined health expenditure and education expenditure and expenditure on employment generation and poverty eradication, the MGNREGS expenditure, we would see that the interest payment component is higher than that. Even it is higher than the total combined capital expenditure of the government in India. So this is not the case in rest of the world. If we compare our health expenditure, which has been mentioned in the first session also by Professor Mehrotra, I guess, that India spends one of the less. I have taken all major country groups around the world and vis-a-vis the health expenditure to GDP ratio of government, India and South Asia stands at the end, and the entire world is spending way above us. And the same with educational expenditure. This is education expenditure to GDP ratio. We spend slightly less than 3% of GDP, and the entire world spends much above the Indian level of expenditure on education. So if we look at the fiscal deficit, that is the social sector expenditure. If we look at the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, however, in Indian case, as compared to all major country groups around the world, in India, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is much higher. It is, in fact, one of the highest in the whole world. However, if we look at the primary deficit to GDP ratio, it is not highest in India. It is somewhere in the middle or on the lower side. So what is happening is this fiscal deficit is highest in India primarily because of large interest payment component, which is around 5% of GDP. So for all other countries, the interest payment component is not that high. I was looking at the fiscal deficit GDP ratio of the whole world from IMF Fiscal Monitor, and everywhere it has gone up due to pandemic. However, in developed world, it has gone up by more than 8.5%. In emerging market economies, it has gone up by 3.1% of GDP. But in India, as proportion of GDP, our combined government expenditure remained more or less stagnant. It has not increased. But fiscal deficit has gone up primarily because of revenue shortfall. And our fiscal deficit is higher as compared to the rest of the world, and primary deficit is not. That shows that our interest payment component is much higher than what the rest of the world is spending on interest payment component. But this is happening because we have stopped monetization and we are borrowing from the private, mainly from the commercial banks and the insurance companies. The government borrowing is financed by them, and the effective interest rate on government debt is around 7%, more than 7% per annum. However, the Reserve Bank of India is sitting on 25% of GDP amount of foreign exchange reserve, which fetches less than 1% return per annum. So there, I think something can be done and something should be done on immediate basis. I mean, part of our government debt can be monetized, can be borrowing from the commercial banks can be replaced by borrowing from the central bank or RBI at some discounted interest rate, which the whole world is doing. As a result of that, and then the interest payment component would come down significantly, and that amount of money can easily be spent on health, education, and employment generation, which is the need of the hour. Now, if we come back to the, this is the last argument, if we come back to the unemployment situation again, we can see that for rural areas, unit level data is not available yet by, I'm talking about PLFS data, NSO, but they have come out with a press statement recently where they have given the urban unemployment rates by gender, male, female, and person till June 2021. Here, if we see that these are the pre-lockdown unemployment rates as compared to that, this is January to March 2020, around 9%. It went up to 21%. According to their definition. According to our definition, it will be even higher. 21% in April to June, that is first phase of lockdown. Then it came down, then it was coming down consistently up to January to March 2021. It came down to almost this at this level, 9.3%. Then again, this is the second wave of COVID. It went up to 12.6%. And then, I mean, more or less it remained high till the June 2021. So this is the scenario. Therefore, unemployment rate has not been normalized yet as of this PLFS data is concerned. So here, and many people are arguing that there is a need for having urban employment guarantee scheme. So I was estimating that what could be the cost for it. The total size of the labor force in India is around 51 crores. And even if we assume that unemployment rate is 10%, then also the number of unemployed people would be around 5 crores. 100 days of employment in a year, total 500 crore person days of work have to be financed in a year. If we have to give employment guarantee to all these 5 crore people, 100 days of employment to all these 5 crore of people. However, the average days of employment provided per household has been less than 50, 48.13 in the last financial year, 2021-22. So it's not 100, it's actually less than 50. Generation of 250 to 260 crore extra person days can address the issue. 340 crore person days are already being generated, have been generated in the financial year 2021-22. Even if the average wage rate under the scheme becomes rupees 300 instead of rupees 209, which was the average during 2021-22, and 600 crore, that is 260 plus existing 340 person days are to be generated in a year, then the total expenditure comes to be around rupees 1.8 lakh crore. They say that 30% is the additional cost, including administrative cost and other costs for equipment, etc. So if we add those 30% cost, then the total cost would not exceed rupees 2.57 lakh crores. According to the budget 2022-23, Union Budget 2022-23, the GDP, the estimated GDP for this year is such that 1% of expected GDP is equal to 2.58 lakh crore in 2022-23. Therefore, with 1% of GDP amount of expenditure, we can actually implement universal employment guarantee program at enhanced wage rate in the country. And already the government is spending around 0.5% of GDP amount on employment guarantee. So plus FCI godowns are flooded with food grain stocks. They don't know how to maintain that much stock. So part of the wages in MG NREGS program can be given possibly in terms of food grain and part of the payment can be made in terms of cash. That way, within 0.5% of GDP amount of additional expenditure, the universal employment guarantee scheme can actually be implemented in India, and that would solve, first of all, that would have huge multiplier effect. So it would generate demand as the poorest of the poorest go for this MGNREGS kind of jobs, whose marginal propensity to consume is very high. So the employment elasticity, the output elasticity and employment elasticity would also be very high, and the multiplier effect would be eventually very high, which would fetch more government revenue also. So from the point of view of fiscal sustainability, I think if government spends more money in MGNREGS and makes it universal, possibly the future revenue stream would also be steadier for the government, and it would help in solving the humanitarian crisis also, and to eradicate extreme poverty in the country. I think this scheme can be enormously useful. So I would like to stop here for the time being, and if there are questions, comments, I would be happy to answer. I don't know whether I would be able to answer, but thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for paying attention.
Thank you, Shurajit, for adding some more insights to what you already written in the book, especially the massive increase in unemployment rate and significant income loss, which you have been hinting at based on the latest PLFS data, and also the different fiscal options which the government has and can exercise to address some of these problems with which the Indian economy has been facing for the last couple of years. So thank you for pointing out all of this. Now just let us take some questions or comments. So I request even the panelists as well as the attendees, if they have any comments, any questions, if you please put them. You may put them in the Q&A box, or you can ask directly. So if you have any questions, any comments.
I would not, it is not a question, but it has always been my curiosity that how you people were able to focus during the COVID times. I know that it was difficult for everyone. How you planned this book, and how you were able to focus it? How many hours?
We discussed these things, and then we just contacted some of the authors, some of the contributors, and all of them, their friends, and also some of the senior professors were there. So they are kind enough to contribute to our this edited book. And this is basically the outcome of some of the informal discussions that which we were actually having, like especially with Indranil and Indranil, we are having some informal discussions, and then this idea came up, like why not let's come up with a book, and then we approached some of our friends, some of our senior professors to come and contribute, and we are fortunate, we are kind enough that they have contributed. And also thank you to all of you, sir, for encouraging that we have, like it is really, we are grateful, like you have really enjoyed the book, some of the chapters, and I hope you find some time to read the entire book, and we look forward to your comments and observations, whatever you have.
So congratulations to all of you again from my side.
So Indranil, I'm seeing you. Do you want to make any comment?
No, thanks. Thank you so much, everyone. I just want to have a question. Can I maybe we can have one?
Yes. One question. I mean, we can have.
Yeah. So I mean, this is to Mr. Pastapati Mitra. I mean, you talked about that during your time. I mean, there was a question on Inspector Raj being. I mean, there was a question on Inspector Raj, right? Now, again, you are saying that, so that's a kind of, I think that should not be there. Again, on the other hand, I mean, if there is no monitoring and on the labor contract and the labor conditions, then we have a problem of lack of supervision, and then labor exploitation and things like that. So in your view, where it should be? I mean, whether the Inspector Raj was a good system, or the present system, or something in between. There is something in between, then what it should be. Yes, sir, you are muted.
Yeah, thank you for that very interesting question. Well, you see, Inspector Raj was given as a justification to liberalize and bring these amendments. Okay. Now, whether the question was whether the Inspector Raj was being overdone or whether it was just an alibi to bring about liberalization, I'll not take that call. It is for you to take the call. Okay. Now, what has now been proposed is a digitalized kind of a system. There will be a self-certification kind of a system where the employers are going to give their compliances, and if the trade unions kind of give a contrary report to government, then the government is going to come with a ton of bricks. Okay, so it is not as if we have done away with the inspections. Inspections are a necessary factor. We have signed the ILO convention, so inspections are not there. Question is whether we were overdoing it or we were not doing it. I think the answer lies somewhere in between. I think the inspections were being carried out. Yes, there were cases where repeatedly some units were getting inspected and repeatedly some units were not getting inspected. So some kind of a randomized algorithmic system has been introduced in the Shram Suvidha portal, which is functional in the Labor Ministry, so that this arbitrariness gets eliminated. Okay, so if someone is getting inspected, then the next guy will also get inspected. That probably was not happening earlier. Okay, I don't know whether I've clarified your question or not, but this is the crux of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, Somali, it's up to you.
So yes, so I'm seeing no more questions. So, and also our next session will start in 15 minutes. So once again, on behalf of the organizing committee, I thank you all the panelists for taking their time to share their thoughts, to encourage us. And we will definitely take notes of the points that you have made, and we will try to work on that, and maybe hopefully we will have your contribution in case we plan to have any new project in the future. So
Yeah,
thank
sure.
you. Thank you once again
Thank you
for
so much.
all your support.
Thanks
and
for
encouragement.
inviting us.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
It was very
Namaskar
good.
to my
Namaskar.
co-panelists and the organizers,
Thank you.
all the
Thank you.
professors from IRMA.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.